If we're going to discuss the Christian case for Trump, I think first we have to deal with the Christian case against him. And as far as that goes, from what I can ascertain, having read many columns outlining it and having listened to many people explain it, as I'm sure you have, the Christian case against Trump seems to boil down to a few points. Number one, most prominently, Donald Trump has severe character defects. He's mean, nasty, selfish, dishonest, etc., not a good moral example, and so on. Now, I'm not going to argue, though, about Trump's personal moral qualities, partly because I don't think we're in a position to make full and informed judgments about the internal workings of another man's soul, being as none of us are God, but also because it's mostly irrelevant in any case. I think Trump's moral failings on a personal level are probably overstated by people who think he's literally worse than Hitler. But the Christian case for Trump, at least in its most persuasive and credible form, has nothing to do with his personality. Accusing Trump of being mean and nasty might be a good refutation of the Christian case for his reelection if that case was hinged on Trump being a really nice and wonderful guy, but it's not. So this whole line of argumentation, so far as I can tell, is irrelevant. Number two, Trump's policies are immoral and anathema to Christian values. For example, he separated families at the border and threw kids into cages, allegedly. Okay, I use the kids in cages example of an alleged unchristian policy from Trump because it's one of the only specific examples ever given. The problem is that this example, this claim, is wildly distorted. The fact is that the cages were holding facilities built during the Obama years. Many of the pictures circulating online of kids in cages were actually taken during the Obama years. And why were these cages used? Well, because there's a flood of people coming over the border. There has to be some way to detain them and figure out who they are and why they're here. Why separate families? Well, because officials down on the border didn't want to put children into the same facilities with adults for fear of any abuse that children might suffer, especially because there's no guarantee that a child coming across the border with an adult is actually the child of that adult. That's where the so-called cages, which are not cages, came into play during the Obama years. Disagree with the approach or the policy all you want, but there is a moral and practical logic to it that makes sense. And it's certainly not unchristian, and anyway, it's not unique to Trump. Number three, Donald Trump is not really pro-life because over 200,000 people have died of COVID under his watch. Now, this argument is simply ridiculous. No reasonable person can possibly blame Donald Trump for all 200,000 plus deaths, as if 0 people would have died if someone else was president. This is a global pandemic. Large, heavily populated countries with lots of international travel were going to get hit, and did, no matter the president. So if you can't blame Trump for all 200,000, how many do you blame him for? 100,000, 50,000, 25,000? Where are you getting these numbers? Nobody's ever explained. They simply pull a number out of thin air and announce that Trump killed X number of people. It's arbitrary. And the really unchristian thing, in my view, is to be exploiting the deaths of real people in such a nakedly political and partisan way. So that argument doesn't work either. And that seems to be the whole Christian case against Trump. I don't find it successful or compelling at all, really. But what is the positive case for him? I think that boils down broadly also to 3 primary points. Number one, Donald Trump governs as a pro-life president. As far as how Trump feels about abortion deep down in his soul, I don't know. It doesn't matter. What matters is that he has taken active steps as president to help end a slaughter that has already claimed the lives of more than 60 million children. As a Christian, or simply as a person with a functioning moral compass, there is no way to minimize 60 million murdered babies. This has to be a priority when you're voting. We're compelled to see it just as it is: unthinkable wickedness, a historic atrocity, an injustice of unfathomable proportions. The Catholic Church calls abortion a moral evil, a grave offense against the dignity of the human being. Joe Biden, the Catholic, fully supports and endorses this moral evil and intends to ensure that the slaughter continues. He intends to fund the slaughter, or rather to force you to fund it. Trump, on the other hand, has appointed 3 Supreme Court justices that might vote to overturn Roe. I say might because we can't really know for sure what anyone will do until they've actually done it. But if there had been a Democrat in office these 4 years, we'd have 3 justices who certainly under no circumstance would ever take a side against Roe. With Trump's picks, overturning Roe is on the table, especially with the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett. She being exactly the pick that almost any conservative pro-life Christian would have made. And that's the point. The accusation that Trump is not personally a conservative pro-life Christian, but merely pretends, is irrelevant, because he has taken steps that any authentic conservative pro-life Christian would take. I just don't see why it matters one way or another what sorts of things Trump was feeling or thinking while taking those steps. There's a lot more that needs to be done. Planned Parenthood was not defunded, for example, but no Republican president has done that, unfortunately, and very few elected Republicans in the federal government have shown any real desire to do it. That's no excuse. I remain infuriated at the whole Republican Party for failing to keep its word on this point, but while you can't absolve Trump of all blame for this, you also can't put all the blame on him. That would be absurd. And it remains the case that when it comes down to the life issue, what you get from Trump is substantially better than what you would get from Biden. And it's not even close. Number two, religious liberty. Joe Biden is an enemy of religious liberty, vowing, among other things, to reinstate Obama's policy of forcing nuns to allow access to contraception. Biden has also said that passing the Orwellian Equality Act, so-called, would be one of his first priorities as president. This law would make both sexual orientation and, quote, gender identity into protected categories under the Civil Rights Act, meaning that a man who identifies as a woman would now be the victim of a civil rights abuse should this self-identification not be respected by, say, a women's shelter that he's demanding access to. This is not only assault on religious liberty, as it forbids the people who run these organizations from operating according to their religious and moral beliefs, but also an assault on science and basic common sense. The Trump administration has stood against all of that. It has advanced policies and initiatives to protect religious liberty. Trump's DOJ has also taken the side of religious liberty as well. For example, filing an amicus brief with the Supreme Court to defend the religious and speech rights of Jack Phillips, the Christian baker, who's been under assault for years now for running his business according to his religious beliefs. Again, this is much, much better than what you would get from Joe Biden. With Trump, you get some steps taken to advance and defend religious liberty. With Biden, you get many steps taken to infringe upon and destroy it. Number three, Donald Trump opposes radical leftism. Joe Biden may not be personally a radical leftist, but all indications are that he will govern like one, or govern at the behest of that faction of his party, which is the mainstream faction now. We know that Biden is, for one thing, a staunch proponent and supporter of the Marxist organization Black Lives Matter, a group that has, in its spare time, between fomenting race riots and calling for the defunding of police departments in the most crime-plagued cities in the nation, has also publicly pledged to disrupt the nuclear family. Trump, for his part, has consistently opposed Black Lives Matter, Marxism, the assault on our history and our traditions, and in recent months has taken specific steps against the particular poison of critical race theory, signing an executive order ordering federal agencies to stop brainwashing their employees into this dogma. Now, there's a lot more to be done here as well, a lot more, such as banning critical race theory and other forms of leftist indoctrination in schools. I don't know if Trump will do that with a second term in office, but I do know that Biden will not. Biden will do the opposite. Trump has already been better, much better, on this score than Biden, with the chance, at least, for further positive developments to come. So, personality aside, this is what it comes down to. Trump has taken steps to protect life and religious liberty, to combat radical leftism. Biden pledges, on the other hand, to further the assault on both life and liberty, and to be a vehicle for radical leftism. These are our two options. To me, it's pretty clear which one we should choose.